Great to have you with us. Joining us now from Fan Nation at SI.com, Mark Wogenrich on the Andrew and More Tree Surgeon Outline. Mark, welcome. Great to have you with us. Hello, Mark. I think he left.
My mistake. How are you, Steve? Pressing buttons.
You notice I have a producer, which takes away
Not his fault at all.
Which takes away everything from Steve pressing buttons.
That's a good point, yeah.
So Steve doesn't press buttons. That way it takes away that foul ball factor from me. How you doing?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. Okay, interesting time. They're going to scrimmage tonight for the first time. I know you couldn't be at the media gathering yesterday, but what are some of the takeaways you've had so far from interacting with the team at media day and so forth?
One of my main ones, it was really interesting the way Sean Clifford described becoming, and I mischaracterized it to him, as becoming a CEO. He's technically not the CEO of Limitless, his NIL agency. That's his brother, Liam. He's the chief development officer. But in founding a company, what he said is that's made him a better quarterback in some ways, that it's allowed him to take the jersey off, so to speak, and he's doing something else. In the morning, he's talking with clients. He's talking with other CEOs. He's getting deals done. He's, commissioning the next phase of NIL for his company, for his clients, and things like that. And I think that's pulled him out of that environment a little bit, and which he said had worn on him in certain instances. Especially when things went wrong in the losing streaks of the last couple of years. And it's given him a reset switch. It's made him really appreciate football, I think, that much more. And I was really struck in talking about that with him, and I wrote about it coming out of Media Day on Saturday, and how I just think I see a lot of things aligning for Sean this year. I mean, we've talked multiple times about the fact that he and Mike Yurcich are together again. He has, I think, a really nice collection of, I think he called it the three-headed monster of three really sharp receivers in Parker Washington, Keandre Lambert-Smith, and Mitchell Tinsley. It sounds like he's really incorporating the freshman running backs into that run game with Kevon Lee and Devin Ford, Keziah Holmes, and the tight ends. One of them just showed up on that Bruce Feldman's freak list, Tyler Warren.
Yeah.
And I just feel like he's got, metaphorically the ducks in a row for this year. And I've always kind of looked at Sean as the make or break point of their offense. The offensive line notwithstanding, run game notwithstanding, everything's got to cycle around him. They're in a better position at quarterback, but I still think with him, he's your highest ceiling as of this point on that team, or your highest floor, as for this season.
Right.
On that team. And, with him being, I think, at his peak and feeling like he's got everything in order, I think you got to feel pretty good about where they're going to be headed offensively, which is not something I would have said coming out of last year.
You referenced the offensive line and the running game in that answer about Sean. You get to the last quarter and a half of a game. What can a competent and threatening running game mean to Sean Clifford?
He's a pretty good play-action guy.
Yes.
And if somebody, and if a defense believes that his play-action means something because they are running effectively, that's huge. If they actually believe that there's an effective run game to be had on, a third and short or something like that, and Sean can tuck a play action, he can tuck a play action ball and throw downfield a little bit, get a big play. They missed not having a big play. A lot of things with the run game last year, but not having a big play running game really kind of took away from Sean's ability, I think, to create more big plays just across the board. Everything just seemed to be, with Keandre and Jahan Dotson primarily, with the big play and Parker Washington. But that's where they concentrated it almost entirely. And I just think if they can get a run game that can get them a 15-yard gain sometimes, running backs that can break a tackle or can get a little hole, and it's not just 3 yards, it's 6, 8, or 10. Is there a 50-yard gain in there somewhere? They had their longest carry was 44 yards last year, which that's really out of character for the Penn State run game, even historically over the past 8 years. It just helps him in so many other ways, and it means that he doesn't have to run the ball too. He can play action to run, and he can zone read to run, but he doesn't have to take that responsibility unto himself. So, and the other thing is, converting a 3rd and 2. When you know you need to convert it, James Franco has mentioned that countless times over the past few years. When you know you need to convert a 3rd and 2 and you do it on the ground, it makes you feel a lot better about the other downs that precede it.
Obviously, the fans are always going to be interested in the players they have not seen before, because there's there's a level of excitement of the unknown. They have obviously recruited a class that they're excited about, and the fans are excited about. What has been the read from the veterans as to what they think of the new players?
I know Sean sounded really. He kind of counts it a little bit, but he'd like the freshmen as a total of the freshman running backs. As a total of that run game, and how they can provide, like what I said, maybe some breakaway ability or some tackle breaking ability that they didn't have, or at least pressure, the other running backs ahead of them to be better at those skill sets. A couple of guys on the defensive line were really high. You don't really hear, defensive line's kind of a hard thing to break into as a young player.
Sure.
And they were really, really high on Dennis Sutton and Zane Durant as being potential contributors. I think we mentioned this maybe before.
Yeah.
The depth of the defensive line doesn't mean those guys have to be 25-player-a-game players.
That's right.
They can be situational guys. They don't, contribute doesn't mean they have to be all Big Ten. Contribute means they can get 10 or 12 really important reps at a certain time in a game that will break P.J. Mustipher, Devon Ellies, or Deesa Isaac, or Nick Tarbert, or Steve Even, or whoever. Then it gets them off their feet and it gets them out of the game. And it also gets them in a situation where it's not they're playing in the fourth quarter against Ohio or something like that they're going to play maybe meaningful snaps at Auburn. Like meaningful snaps, in the third quarter when the game is starting to get that on-the-line element, and they need to get a stop on a drive in the third quarter, stuff like that. You put guys in those positions; those are meaningful snaps, even if there's 8 of them a game.
Yeah, and that's important because it sounds like Manny Diaz could play if they you have to stay healthy to do this, so you have to couch it. They could play as many as 22 to 27 different guys on defense. Yeah. Which does change the thought process of how you play the fourth quarter because you have fresh players to do it.
Imagine the number of guys they can play because of the young player, not necessarily true freshmen, but the redshirt freshmen and the sophomores, guys who did play last year on that defense, especially that secondary with, 7 or 8 guys who could, 7 or 8 guys who could rotate that in there. And then the options that frees you up to play more nickel, take a linebacker off the field if you need to. If you feel like the linebacker is your weakest depth spot, that you can concentrate the linebackers on the field who you feel are at the really at the best of their positions, Curtis Jacobs, and if you feel really good like Jonathan Sutherland, sort of thing, you can pull guys in and out. You can play the back end guys and really not lose a step and actually be better. Situationally, obviously, against passing offenses.
The Purdue game is, of course, coming up in 3 weeks. It's going to be. How do you feel about conference games as season openers?
I actually kind of like it. I liked it last year. Even though I didn't go to Wisconsin, there was an atmosphere. I felt like that built up around that game, and a lot of it probably had to do with the fact that you were starting a season after no fans at games, and then you were filling up you're filling up the stadiums again. So you're doing it in Madison, which that's a huge that was a huge part of it. But I like this because there's no there's no test driving of your
sure.
team.
Yeah.
When you've got to play Thursday night at Purdue, a 9-4 team that's going to throw 50 times on you, most likely.
Yeah.
You can't just kind of ease your way into this and go, well, if we don't have the right 11 guys out there, I know we can mix and match. I know our options that we have available. You've really got to know your position right away. You don't get that time. So I maybe I even like it a little bit more because the road issue. I mean, Penn State hasn't done that, at home.
Right.
So I like it, it being kind of a road game too.
Yeah.
Makes I don't know if it would be different. It just home schedules, either you're playing that maybe the marquee kind of game where they played Arizona back in 99.
Yeah.
Or going to like Giant Stadium, playing Central Florida or something like that, or MetLife now. Sorry, MetLife. But I really like it. I don't know that it's an annual thing. I don't know that I necessarily feel comfortable with it as an annual thing. Maybe more of a conventional opener on occasions. But last couple of years, Penn State doing it 2 years in a row, I think is great. And I don't know, but I don't know that they really want, obviously, to be doing that annually, of course.
Yeah.
But
is it's an opener. Is it potentially a tone setter?
Yeah, last year's absolutely was a tone setter. You got a real sense of the defense being a playmaking defense. They really obviously set that tone. Sean played pretty well in that opener last year. You got the sense that that was going to be a good football team, and it really was until that into that first quarter against Iowa. So yeah, I think that game last year really did set a tone for Penn State. That changed because of injuries, and I think this game should do much the same.
So in the end, it's not official what the TV contract's going to look like, but all the indications are Fox, CBS 330, NBC, which has been the talk since mid-May. It's the part about ESPN, it now looks like being out. What's your thought on that?
I think I find it a very aggressive move on the Big Ten's part not to have ESPN as part of this broadcast. And it doesn't come down to just the singularity of having a game on ESPN. It's the other 6 days of the week that ESPN still generates, not just on television, but even across all its digital platforms.
Yes.
It generates like the talk about college football. It is like essentially the college football talk show for the most part, and it provides a lot of content for that, for that the college football space, college football atmosphere. And you really have to wonder if that gets backseated in some ways. Like ESPN obviously shows NFL highlights from other games. That's not, that's clear. But will those Big Ten games get backseated? Will Big Ten conversation get backseated? I didn't even know ESPN knew hockey existed when they didn't have their contract.
True.
So they're not going to ignore it. They can't ignore the Big Ten, but they can strategically elevate the SEC. And by owning so much property within college football and driving so much conversation with college football, I don't know if that's going to have an impact on things like, playoff seedings, playoff voting in the future, bowls necessarily, who gets, which teams get in the bowls and things like that. It's a bold play on the Big Ten's part to take away the other 6 days of conversation for this three-pieced broadcast network of games.
If the college football playoff were to expand and they went with a multi-network platform, which means ESPN and also somebody else or multiples, does it then blunt the idea of being shut out?
Yeah, because then ESPN is a de facto partner again in some ways. Because, you're right, they're going to have games. So that'll be the broader, the broader college football playoff, the 12 or 16 teams. That's going to include 3 or 4 Big Ten teams, whatever it is. That will make a difference. Yeah, no question. I think for the interim, and honestly, there might not be much interim, in that space. It might only be a couple of years.
Right.
There might be one that you don't have ESPN on the Big Ten deal and then the 14 playoff too. So it might not mean much, and maybe that's what the Big Ten is part of their thinking too. It could definitely be part of their thinking is that ESPN is really going to be an ancillary partner in some ways because of the playoff. And
if you play a non-conference road game,
they'll be. Yep.
You'd be on ESPN probably anyway. So, so you're not going to be completely shut out on ESPN. At some point, they actually do have to talk about you because you went someplace else to play. Mark, always a pleasure. Great to talk with you, and thanks for all the valuable time you give us.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime, Steve. Great to talk to you,